Oh,
Hello and welcome. This is Rasheem with the Counter Narrative Show. Tonight's episode is Motherhood at the Intersections, Mothering Sons. Right now, we have three mothers of sons of various ages joining us tonight to have that real live conversation. There we go. To have that real live conversation. I'm just going to give them opportunity to kind of introduce themselves and kind of set the context and the framework for our conversation around mothering at the intersections, and even more specifically, mothering sons. And I'm going to actually start with the lovely Fifi first. Fifi, could you tell us your name, your state of residence, and the age of your son?
okay. Hi, everybody. I am Felicia, also known as Fifi. I live in the state of Maryland, in the lovely city of Baltimore. Son is 18.
18 years old.
I know,
All
right?
right. I mean, I remember when I first met your son, and he was like fully with the whole braces situation
Exactly.
before his voice started changing. You know what? Super shy kid, and now he's taller than me. So it's
Exactly.
interesting to kind of watch that transformation. But he's a lovely kid. I really like him.
Thank you.
Sure. I think he get it from his mama though. Um, the next we have Shaida. Shaida, please share with us your name, your state of residence, and the age of your son.
Hello, I'm Shaida. I live in Maryland in Baltimore County, and my son's 9.
Nine. Nine. And her son is super adorable. Like,
Oh,
I don't know, that one you might have to watch out with him. Like because not only is he adorable, like I feel like he got a sense that he kind of like knows that he's adorable.
No, he doesn't actually. I hope that lasts for a really long time.
Oh, okay.
I think he's like uncomfortable with being adorable, and I appreciate that. I'm not rushing that process to be
I
over.
know, really. Listen, I'm with you all the way on that. And Ashley, your name, your state of residence, and the age of your son.
Yeah, so my name is Ashley with two E's, and I have a son who is 3. He just turned 3 like 2 weeks ago, and I live in Baltimore, Maryland.
We all Baltimore in here tonight. That's what's up. So one of the first questions that I want to get to around this topic is kind of just set the stage generally around motherhood. And I'm going to go back to you again, Felicia. Felicia, would you rather me call you Felicia or Fifi on this show?
Fifi, you can call me Fifi. That's cool.
Okay. So Fifi, what does motherhood mean to you?
Oh, You know, when I became a mother, I really didn't think about it. Happened, and the first thing I noticed was I had to get me out of the way. It was all about my son now. Sacrifice, responsibility, patience, and lots of joy. So yeah, motherhood is very important. It's very important. It's actually, pastors say that it's the very first vocation for a woman. Motherhood.
Very first vocation. That's interesting. Now, does the pastor say that it's the first vocation for fathers?
He didn't say that.
Oh.
He said for mothers. I never really thought about the reason why he didn't say that with regards to fathers, but I took it very seriously from the day that I actually heard that son. But it came back to me once my son was born. Yeah.
And Shakira, what does motherhood mean to you?
I knew it was going to be my turn, and yet I'm still thinking. I think for me, the thing that sticks out is like finding the balance between, you know, wanting to be a disciplinarian, having a child who is well behaved, but also knowing that that child feels loved and cared for on a constant basis, right? Because I think there's a way in which The discipline part is kind of unavoidable, right? They'll get it out in the world, but the love and care part is something that we can't guarantee they'll get outside of the home. So for me, it's kind of striking a delicate balance with those two things.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And Ashley, what does motherhood mean to you?
Motherhood means growth.
I think I'm here.
Growth and change and maturity. And then a little bit of immaturity too, because I feel like in order to love my kid, I have to be a little immature and get down on his level and play with him and wrestle with him and all that stuff. So it kind of helps me grow in one area, but then in the other end, it's helping me to have that like childlike faith and joy and fun and care and just kind of like it doesn't really matter, whatever, and smile at things that usually would like get my panties in a bunch. But yeah.
Right, because we're going to have enough stuff that's going to get our panties in a bunch. Might as well reserve that energy, right?
Right.
Dr. Wilburn, or should I just call you Rhonda for the show?
Rhonda's great. Yay, I made it.
You did. So, Rhonda, we went around and just introduced ourselves a little bit just by answering these 3 questions. So, could you give us your name, your state of residence, and the age of your sons?
So my name is Rhonda Wilburn, and I live in Bowie, Maryland, and my sons are 19 and 21.
Mm. And could you also follow that up by telling us, what does motherhood mean to you?
Motherhood is probably the greatest thing that I've done. I'm like this really, really excited mom, have been from the day I gave birth. Still, even at 19 and 21, continue to be in awe of my sons. So it's like one of the most exciting roles I think I've ever had.
Mm-hmm. Now, with that, I'm going to go back to, you mentioned something earlier about what you said that you had heard from the pastor, and this kind of like just really fits in with one of the next questions that I have, and that is, in what ways do you see, if you see, the role of motherhood or the role of mother as different from that to the role of father?
Actually, I don't see a lot of difference in terms of how we would rear the children. I think that, I don't know, in a lot of cases, the mother has always been the present one for the children. In my case, my son has been with me since day one. So it's kind of tough for me because I haven't seen the role of a father, to tell you the truth, not in my own family. I've observed other men who are single dads raising their children, but up close and personal, I have not really seen the role of a father. So I can't really say how they differ.
Mm-hmm.
I can only speak from my role as a mother to my son.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think even in that statement, it almost says that physical presence seems to be more optional. In one role than it is in the other.
Yeah, when you ask the question, Rasheem,
I don't know. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, when you asked the question, Rasheem, that was the first thing that came to my mind, that I think, at least socially, it seems like motherhood is very obligatory, whereas fatherhood seems optional. And so the ways in which the notion of like an absent mother just seems appalling, whereas I think we've become normalized to a notion of like absent fatherhood, for example. So I think the social meaning is very different.
Mm-hmm. How has that played out for you, Ashley?
I'm trying to like visualize it, because off the break, I want to say, mothers are the nurturing ones. They are the ones that are kind of like protecting the child, like, oh, let me kiss your boo boo and all that stuff. But um, with me and my husband, it's kind of the opposite. Like, I'm the one that's on the floor wrestling with him, and I'm the one that's telling him, go ahead, jump off the wall, and kind of encouraging him and pushing him to kind of reach his full potential and to, cross the boundaries or figure out where the boundaries are. Whereas my husband is more of the, come here, let me see your boo boo. Oh no, you fell down. Let me kiss it. So it's almost like, for us, it's kind of shifted, or like the opposite of what's normal, or what's seen as the cultural norms. But when I think about my mother and some connections between her and how I am, I think that being like the listening ear almost, and being the connector, um, yeah. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense. Rhonda, tell us, for you, how do you see the role of fatherhood and the role of motherhood, similarities or differences?
Yeah, I think for my sons, both having both parents in the home was very important. And I do think that some of it may be normalized just based on what each individual child's experience is. So I think that if one parent was never present, then it becomes probably more normal to be able to function without that parent. But I think that if both parents were present, then I think that becomes the normal. Even though I think sometimes kids may miss whatever parent isn't there for a variety of whatever reasons. But I do think that for the most part, parents seem to figure out how to make whatever it is their reality is the normal for their kids, and their kids seem to do just fine. I think with my kids, I mean, their dad was very involved in their life, and I think like the other person said, I was more of the nurturer and protector and all of that. And then their dad was the more serious one, even though I felt like my role was also a serious role. And neither one of us used any physical discipline with our kids. So that was kind of an interesting dynamic too, is figuring out the best ways to discipline our kids without using physical discipline. But I think that having both of us present was really important for both of our kids. And I think that we balanced out each other in that whole experience very well.
One of the things that you just mentioned was around this, and some of the things that we can look at and take as your greatest influences, Rhonda, on how you approached motherhood.
Right. You asked me a question?
Yeah. What are some of your greatest influences on how you approach motherhood?
Well, one of the things was, I mean, I was determined I was not going to beat my children. Like, there's something about that just never set well with me. Like, as a child myself, being physically disciplined, and then, as a trained social worker, I just developed values and norms around not hitting kids, and then that just became my reality. And I mean, contrary to popular belief, I mean, you really can raise black children, black boys, without hitting them. And so that became something that was really important. And a lot of it was really just around, I wanted my kids to feel their own sense of power and their own sense of empowerment. And I didn't want them to ever feel defeated or oppressed or less than. And there's something about hitting kids that always made me feel like that kind of developed some of that kind of energy in kids.
Mm-hmm. Like violent?
Not necessarily just violent, but just even the ideal that somebody else has the right to do something to harm you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I never wanted them to exist in the world thinking that other people had the right to treat them badly. So I wanted them to always feel like no one ever had the right to treat them badly. But I also didn't want them to think that they had the right to treat other people badly either.
Mhm.
I can agree with that. I've had the same kind of thoughts with um, just feeling like I would be doing to him what I'm telling him not to do to other people. Like, don't hit them because you're mad at them or because they did something that you're not, you don't agree with. But then I turn around and do it to him because he's done something that I don't agree with. So I can feel that same sense when it comes to discipline.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did not get spanked as a child. So for me, spankings just weren't on the table in the first place. I didn't get spanked, and I was also very well behaved. So we had lots of conversations growing up. I was always able to speak up for myself as long as I did it in a respectful manner. So that was something that I definitely wanted to bring into my own child rearing practices around raising a child who could, verbalize whatever issues were coming up, and who could be respectful without the threat of a spanking.
Yeah.
Could you say more, Shaida, about some of the influences on your approach to motherhood in general?
Yeah, so I think my mother, of course, right, because of the not spanking. But honestly, a lot of stuff I found myself just figuring out on my own. So sometimes that meant having conversation with random friends. Sometimes that meant going to Barnes and Nobles, and if the book was too expensive, just sitting in the bookstore and reading for a while. I sometimes turn to online sites to look up information. We have weird spacing in our family, so people in my family either didn't have kids when I had them, or had kids way after I did. And so I tended to turn to outside sources and things of that sort.
Hmm.
And Fifi, what were some of your influences on your approach to motherhood?
Starting off, I was an old parent.
Mm-hmm.
My son was born, I was 36 years old. So my very first influence were books. My mom didn't live near me, so I would either, if I wasn't on the phone calling her, I was picking up a book, listening to Dr. James Dobson and a whole lot of other great authors. And then finally, my spiritual leaders became a great influence on me as a parent. I did pick up some of my mom's habits, but my spiritual leaders, I would say, had the greatest influence on me as a parent.
Mhm. I want to go back to, actually, I want to stay with you, Fifi, and I want to ask you, when we talk about, you mentioned you started off as an older parent, as well as some of your experiences in terms of your influences. You have a son, your son is 18?
He's 18 now, yeah.
Is 18?
Unbelievable. I know. You knew him when he was 10.
Jeez. Okay. So have you had any, well, first, before I ask that question, what does motherhood look like in the age of Black Lives Matter? You live in Baltimore, Maryland. You just recently had this Freddie Gray situation happen. Have you had conversations with Malik around that? And what do those conversations look like?
Yeah, well, first of all, I didn't want to have a son without a father being present. That terrified me. But I never in a million years would have figured that my son would be living in a time like this. So having conversations with him, first of all, I've had to get his attention because he's so tuned out of it. He's not really tuned into it. I would say that's because the heart of Baltimore City, we live in the county. So we're away from most of the excitement. So we don't sit down and watch news together. We don't, we just don't tune into it. I myself had not tuned into it a lot. But when it became a movement, I started talking to him about how he needs to be if he's ever confronted by a police officer. So those were difficult conversations. And he would always come back and say to me, why? You know, why do we have to be different? Why do we have to act different? So having to explain that to him and, you know, just for his well-being has been difficult. They've had a few conversations at school, but not much. And, you know, when I know that something is really impacting him, he'll come home and talk about it. But he talks about it with anger. It's about it with anger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's always, why me? Why are we being treated differently?
Mm-hmm. When you tell him in terms of, or when you have conversations with him around how to engage with police, what are some of your instructions and advice that you give him?
Well, he's a very well-mannered kid, but I also know that he has anger. So I always tell him, use your own head. Don't listen to what your friends would say. Just, you know, remain calm, know what your rights are, and do what you're told to do. I mean, what else is there to say? I mean, so.
When you say he tunes out of it, what is it about that? Like, do you feel like it's like something from his particular generation? Does he not see it as a big issue?
I think it has to do with geography. Yeah. Because he's not in the city, he's not exposed to certain lifestyles and things that are happening within the city. And his friends are not, because they're out here in the county as well. Mm-hmm. So just because they're not, you know, they're not exposed to it, they're not having conversations every day, it's not in his face every day, he just sort of tunes it out like, you know, this is not happening to me, it's happening to the people around me.
Mm-hmm. Rasheem, can I respond to that too?
Please do.
Because my sons are at a similar age. They're 19 and 18, and they're both in school in Miami. And they're very tuned out of it as well from the perspective of, I mean, they've had the privilege of growing up in an environment where, you know, they went to private school, that, you know, they had experiences and exposure that kept them away from a lot of those things. And so they don't see themselves as being a part of it. But it's interesting because as a mother, even though I know that that's not my son's reality, I know that at any given moment, somebody can make it their reality. And so I worry about them all the time. In fact, my youngest son just started a job tonight delivering pizza, and I did not want him to do that, but I didn't want to tell him that he couldn't do it. But me and his dad, neither one, like, we did not want him delivering pizza. But he was so excited, you know, this is his first job getting paid, earning his own money. And so, but I'm like, I don't want my child out there delivering pizza because, you know, the world is dangerous out there. And so, I still worry about them, but I'm actually glad that they don't have to worry about it, that they've had the privilege of growing up in a way that they don't have to worry about it. But I worry about it all the time because I know that as long as other Black boys have to worry about it, it could become their reality at any given moment.
When you say that they don't have to worry about it, are you saying, can you say more about them not having to worry about it?
I think it was what the other person said about geography, like their reality in terms of where they negotiate life doesn't put them in the center of where a lot of things are happening on a continuous basis. So it's like on a daily basis, they're pretty separated from where things probably would happen more regularly. But again, they could be driving somewhere and get stopped by a police officer, or they could have some negative experience in their negotiating of the world. But for the most part, where they're heading to and where they're going are pretty safe spaces where they're going to be, protected. But it's like, but as they negotiate the world, you still never know when something potentially could still happen to them. But like, they're not going to be walking around in the city or, in areas or doing things in environments where there's a lot of violence, or there is a lot of things that, you know, may happen on a regular daily basis, but they still may cross paths with any kind of situation, which could cause them to, be in danger at any given moment. So I'm aware of that, but I think they're less aware of that because where they're going and what they're doing is somewhat isolated, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. I think if
Right.
oh, Fifi, you want to say more on it?
Oh no, I was just agreeing with her.
So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying like I guess geographically they're not in a city, they're not in highly uh, densely populated urban areas. They're not in areas where there may be crime. So it's less likely for them that they will have any negative impact from police or from the population in that area.
Well, and I mean, and again, like, so for example, they're not going to go and play pickup soccer or basketball, in areas where they don't know. They're going to go down to DC to their high school where they went to school, this very isolated, with boys that they grew up with. And so they're not going to have a lot of exposure to people that they don't know. Um, so that's one of the things that I think becomes kind of protective for them. Whereas I think a lot of young men negotiate the world meeting people that they don't know all the time. And so they're constantly at risk because they're engaging with a lot of people that they don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I think that definitely is a factor. And so when they go places, they're going to communities and areas where they know the people, and they already have a sense of what that looks like and what that's going to be like. But again, I don't want to set up this false ideal that somehow that prevents anything from, potentially happening, because it doesn't. Because when they're driving and walking and doing whatever, they look like any other black boy. They show up just like any other black boy. And so, I mean, if someone wants to target them, that could always be a potential thing that could happen.
Mm-hmm. Someone from the well, first let me say for all of the people on the side that are watching, thank you for watching. Thank you for engaging in your questions. I don't know you here unless you type and say hello. Gwinnetta Curry says, what about when these young men leave these protected spaces that we're talking about? How how can you prepare them for that? I guess she's saying like they may not always live in a quote unquote county. They may not always, be in particular spaces, just like how you were just kind of talking about, Rhonda, in terms of, they may drive somewhere else. And also when you mentioned about the police delivery, not police, sorry, I'm thinking of police in my mind. The pizza delivery, um, they're going into different spaces. And her question is, how do you prepare them from, for when they go out of these spaces? And I also want to interject one other thing that she didn't say in this question, but I want to specifically say as it relates to state sanctioned violence, do you think that it plays a difference depending upon if they're in the city or if they're in the suburbs? Like that the police may not harass, shoot, or bother them if they're in the suburbs as opposed to them being in the city? Oh,
Is that I think
I think her call accidentally dropped. Do you want to take on that one?
Yeah. So I do think there's a way in which we can set up these dichotomies, right? Of like those are those things that happen to people who live in the city, in particular communities, from particular backgrounds. And I think that has the potential to get us into dangerous territory, because I think part of that narrative also comes with the idea that maybe some people are in situations that make them more prone to have interaction with police. And I think that in a lot of ways, this is less about individual action and more so about a kind of overall disrespect or devaluation of Black lives and perhaps Black male lives in particular. And so I don't know, like I live in the county, but it is never the case that I am convinced that living in the county is somehow going to make my son safer. Because I think that, right, we live in a state where we know that police officers can inflict particular kinds of violence with very little recourse for their actions. And so for me, I don't know, like I think about, for example, when the uprising happened in Baltimore, my mother was really upset and she kept saying, Shaida, this shouldn't be happening. A woman was pulled out of her car somewhere near Mondawmin, right? And my mother just kept saying, Shaida, that could have been you, right? Like that could have been you who they pulled out the car. And I asked her, I was like, but could that have been my brother who got shot? And it had never dawned on her because we live in the county. So I grew up in the projects in New York. But we live in the county now, right? Things are pretty quiet. So for her, like my brother, it never dawned on her that my brother could be Freddie Gray, right? Because like that's not the environment that we live in. But I'm like, for me, I don't want to separate my county son out from, for example, kids who are living in the city, because my child will always be in the county, right? And there are ways in which his living in the county might not always be read on his body when he has particular kinds of interactions. And so I do think that we get into a kind of slippery slope when we start to become too comfortable with this assumption that our geographic location will, have too much of an implication on the kinds of interactions our children might have. I mean, I think that's the world that I would love to live in. I'm just not sure that that is the world that we actually live in.
Mm. Can you say more about, Shaida, can you say more about, and your son is what, 11?
9.
9? So can you say more about, and if you even had this type of conversation with a 9-year-old boy? I mean, I'm making some assumptions, like maybe not, like maybe you might feel like,
No, I don't. We deal with more on the ground stuff like bullying and what it means to deal with violence. And we live in a Black community, right? So what it means to deal with particular kinds of interactions in our community. I mean, he sees stuff. My research is on prison, so he sees some stuff and he asks questions. I've never necessarily believed in baby talks, so we have upfront conversations about things. But police and state interactions are a difficult thing, right? Because we ideally want to tell our kids that, right, like the police are there to protect us, that the state is there to act in our interest. And that's not the way it always works. But I also think that it's hard to explain to a child. But we will have the conversations, and if things come up, I will address them. But we haven't, not that I can think of, have we had any explicit kinds of conversations? Although there are times, for example, when we leave, our very predominantly Black community, and I have to have conversations with him around like what it means to be Black and maybe why certain people are going to look at us, even though we're doing the same thing that everybody else is doing, that going into different communities might mean that our actions get interpreted in different kinds of ways.
Mm-hmm. Ashley, as a member of LBS and as a mom, and I know your baby is just 3.
Yeah.
these conversations, like, what do you have, like, what would you like to add to this particular conversation? Because you do a lot of activism work within Baltimore City around some of these issues. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, so I first started really getting engaged around the whole Black Lives Matter movement and just the movement toward Black liberation around the time of the uprising. And I saw my nephews. I have like 6 nephews, and I just saw them in this story and in these stories that kept coming up. And I just was thinking about my husband who is Black and my baby, and I'm like, I gotta do something. I gotta get moving. I gotta get other people to understand what's going on. And so one of the things that came up in my mind as we were talking about this idea of geographic location and protection and all that stuff is that I never experienced like overt racism until I moved to the county. So I'm not from Baltimore, I'm from Pittsburgh, but I've always lived in the inner city. And it wasn't until I moved to, where did I just move from? Bowley's Quarters out in Baltimore County, northeast Baltimore County, where people were riding around with their Confederate flags on the back of their pickup trucks. And a woman called me racist because I switched lanes and she wasn't ready for me to. So it wasn't until like that moment that I experienced it, and I was in the county. I'm like, whoa, and it kind of took me off guard. And this was after I had started becoming really active in advocacy and community engagement and all that stuff. And so I was like, whoa, this really exists. It became real for me at that moment. And so now I don't know, it's interesting. I take my baby with me when I go do advocacy work, and when there's rallies or when we're pushing for legislation and things like that, I have my little baby strapped to my back or in the stroller or whatever. And we haven't had these conversations yet, right? Because he's 3, but he's seeing stuff and he's looking and he's like, what's going on? And I can see his brain moving. And so I feel like when it's time to have those conversations, he'll somewhat have an idea of what's going on. And I've also just been trying to inject into him that he is enough, and that he is equal to other people because he's a person just like they are, but also making sure that he understands history. And I think that's where some of the confusion is with a lot of kids, is that they don't understand the history of racism and structural oppression and institutional oppression and all that stuff. And it comes as a shock to them because they're like, whoa, where did this come from? Like for me, right, that one day someone calls me a nigger, right? And I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? But it's not until we understand kind of that history and we're teaching our kids that history that they get it. Mm-hmm. And they can put the pieces together like, okay, we never really solved these problems and therefore they're not gone. They're just a little hidden, or you can't really see them unless you go to certain areas where they have their Confederate flags up and they're not afraid to say whatever. But in, the normal society, it's a little hidden and it's structural. It's not people calling you out your name.
Right. Look, they're a little bit more emboldened now with they, you know what I mean, they new president 45. I had to tell somebody the other day, don't let your new president get you beat up. Just like that, with a big old smile on my face. Anywho, sorry, showing out a little bit. So what are the questions that I have for you, Fifi? Well, before I go into that even, let me say that one of the things that I feel like I'm hearing from all of you is this challenging balance between freedom, like, raising a free child, like, that they are free, that they're, equitable to everyone in society. And also you're still balancing the awareness of what's out there in the world. where it's like, okay, you can, ride your bike without the training wheels, but like I'm over here in the bushes, like watching,
Exactly.
ready to, come and help if I can. And I know that that is absolutely a delicate balance. I want to ask, starting with you, Fifi, around your child's gender, raising a male. Do you feel like that him being a male has impacted your approach to motherhood? And even more specifically, him being a male and you being um, female, has that impacted your approach to motherhood at all?
Yeah, it has, because I had the pleasure of raising two nieces. And so I know I can feel the difference between raising girls and boys. So by my son, mothering a son is quite different in the sense that I want to douse him with affection. And he's not too open to that all the time. So that makes me kind of like, well, gee, let me stand back a bit. But it's opened my eyes a lot as to how to allow him to be who he is. When I had the girls, I was very much more involved in their lives, in their day-to-day movement, their conversations with their friends, their dress, how they carry themselves as young ladies. Not that I don't do that with my son, but not so much. So yeah, my son has always been an independent young man, and even more so with turning 18. It's really like, Mom, I got this. So I had to stand back a lot.
Hmm. Right. What would you say is, like, you mentioned some of your approaches and your differences, and like it sounds like you were more hands on when you're raising your nieces, and with your son you're not as hands on. You want to be affectionate, lovey dovey mom, and he's like, Mom, I'm too cool for that now. I got a deep voice. Um,
I got hair on my chest.
right.
Like, okay, all right.
Are there some differences in like the things that you might teach him about life that you might
Yeah,
girl differently maybe?
there are some major differences, and one reason being, when I had my nieces, I wasn't even aware of who I was.
Mm.
So now that there's one advantage to being an older parent is you do know more. You have a little bit more wisdom. So once I figured out who I was and learning to love myself, I was better able to love my son. So yeah, I just showered my nieces with gifts, and I didn't teach them a lot about relationship. I just gave them things, and that has a lot to do with how they came into my life, which is more than I can talk about right now. But
Yeah, no,
that's one big difference.
and it
Yeah,
sounds like some of that had something to do with like where you were in life, which I totally get. Like I think my mom is a different mom when she was mothering me she had me at 15 than she is, mothering my brother who she had a little later, like maybe in
right.
their 30s or so. So I get that. That sounds like that has something to do with like where you were and how aware
Yeah.
you were. So Rhonda, I'd like to ask you the same question around that. To what degree do you feel like your son's um, gender, being boys or men now, impacted your approach to motherhood?
Yeah, I mean, it totally changed. I think how I mothered, and especially since I only had sons, and so I didn't have the female, equivalent. And so I really ended up centering my whole household around the needs of my son to the point that I did something that I don't hear many people talk about, and that is, in my house, norm for the seat to be up.
Oh.
And nobody complained about that, because I decided, it's three males in the house. I'm the only female, so when I go to use the bathroom, I make sure that I put the seat down. And so nobody ever fussed at them about the seat being up. And so that became their reality for everything that was about being a man or being a male, that nobody chastised them or challenged them about what was normal for them in terms of being a man. But I also, I found myself stepping back a lot more than I wanted to. Like when they said, I got this, mom, a lot of times I was really nervous about that, but I knew that I had to do that, in order for them to be comfortable in their own skin and comfortable, in their own spaces. And so I found myself pulling back more than I wanted to, but I think ultimately it was the right thing to do. And the thing that I think is happening and will happen is they come back around and need you at different phases of their life. Like my youngest son just had his first breakup with his first girlfriend. Well, he needed me a lot, for that. And so I think that that will be true as life goes on, that there'll be different phases and different times when they'll really need me. And so I just want to be able to show up and be available, for the things that they need me for. And so that has always been important for me, that I developed the kind of relationship that, if you don't want, my support, if you don't want my advice or whatever, then, I raised you so that you can be independent and be able to make your own choices and decisions. But just know that I'm always going to be here, and be available for you when you need me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember.
And I look forward to those things.
Yeah, I remember you told me about that breakup situation. How is he?
Yeah. I mean, it's still been kind of an up and down summer for him, but I'm kind of glad that it happened that way instead of the other way around, because, the other way around, I would be really concerned about the girl, and I wouldn't want her going off doing nothing crazy. Whereas with my son, even though I knew that it hurt him and he had a hard time managing it, I knew his strength, and so I knew that he wasn't going to do anything dumb or stupid to harm himself or hurt himself. With a daughter, I felt like, oh my God, I would have had to be right there in the middle of it to make sure that, she was going to be okay in a
Mm-hmm.
different kind of way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, what about for you? How has the gender of your son impacted your approach to motherhood?
I'm not that sure that I would mother different if I had a daughter. I did lots of things that I take to be kind of non-traditional, at least from my family standpoint. So Chase does not have the privilege of being the like man of the house or anything else. There are two of us in the house, and everyone is expected to pull weight in whatever way they are best capable. So if he is better at, I don't know, doing some task that is traditionally conceived of as feminine, he does the task. If I'm better at doing something traditionally conceived of as masculine, I do the task. I was very strict about not allowing language about girls and boys toys when he was growing up. There were no girl and boy toys. There were no girl and boy colors. You could play with whatever color you wanted, whatever toy you wanted. As he got older, we then had more general conversations that said, let's be clear, there are ways in which most people are going to operate, right? So most people are going to choose certain colors if they're a boy. And if you are a boy and you choose, for example, say your favorite color is pink or purple, some people might not like it. Some people might pick fun at you, but you still get to choose to do it. So I've been very intentional about trying to allow him the space to be whoever he wants to be, while also making sure that he knows that not everyone is going to approve of him making choices that don't fit with the norm in particular kinds of ways. But we didn't do, I'm very opposed to the man up, or if he's crying, you know, you're being a girl or things like that, right? For me, it is about age, right? And I think I would do the same thing with a daughter. So you're crying, how old are you? Right? Like, are you, you know, babies cry. Big kids get to talk, right? Or explain things. I'm assuming it's something that he could just talk through or whatever. He's also allowed to cry. I don't know, like I'm very committed to the idea that whatever child I had needs to be able to fend for and take care of themselves, right? I want to, you know, male or female child know that when they are old enough to be partnered, that they can conceive of themselves as a full package and the other person is an added addition. I absolutely grew up in a household where me and my brother were raised radically different. So I was raised to be this very independent person who could run the household myself if need be. And my brother got very little of that training. And so I think for me, I made a really conscious effort to be thinking about, you know, if my mother was going to be raising this really independent person who I'm sure she imagined would have a husband eventually, what man was I going to ever marry if women were raising sons in the way she was raising my brother? Right? Because he wasn't going to be my equal. He wasn't going to be able to provide for me. He wasn't going to be this super independent, forward-thinking person. Because that she was not raising him in a way that I think I would find appealing, right, as a partner and as a match. And so I asked for, I wanted a son, but I also in the back of my mind knew that I wanted to raise a child who could do all the things that need to be done, right? So I don't think of cooking and cleaning as feminine tasks. Those are human tasks, right? We all need to eat. We all want to live in like a fairly clean household and things of that sort. So I don't have a daughter, but I'm not that convinced I would raise her radically different than how I'm raising Chase.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Ashley? Any impacts on your approach, or even if it's not just your action, your thinking around motherhood, having a boy child?
I don't know. I think that I don't think it would be gender specific, but just individual specific. Like I'm interacting with this child based on what I identify that they need, and that they need. I have what I became an aunt when I was 3, and I have 6 nephews and like 2 nieces. So I've been with kids a long time, and I've been that aunt that was like really strict, like, no, we're not doing that. Go apologize to your mother. That was disrespectful. But I'm also the like loving, like, come here, what's going on? Let's talk. Let's do it. Whatever. What do you want to do? Let's go hang out. Whatever. And I feel like I'm the same way with my son. Mm-hmm. That I'm very like, you know, let's wrestle, let's get down on the ground, let's do this, let's run outside, let's play. But at the same time, like, no, that's not okay. Mm-hmm. No, like, let's get it together. So I don't think that it would be gender specific. Like I get down and wrestle with my niece when she was little too. But I think it's more on the individual. What does this child need? What kind of support? What kind of attention does this particular person need?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think something that you said, Shaida, that I hear all the time, and I'd like to hear from anybody else who have heard this, or even more specifically had experience with this, how people say mothers raise their daughters and love their sons. Has anybody heard that term before? Like how they're
I've heard that expression.
Yeah.
I mean,
Go ahead, Rhonda.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have heard that, but because I had sons, I don't know if I would have did anything different if I had had daughters. But I mean, I had to raise my sons. I couldn't just love them. I think I did a combination of both, but I've seen, you know, that dynamic where sons didn't really have the same responsibilities as daughters, and I think that's a huge what's the word? I think that's a huge deficit for whatever child, you know, is not trained so that they can become self-sufficient and be able to take care of themselves. And so I just think that's a huge mistake, but I do think it happens. But hopefully it happens less now than it used to. Like, hopefully parents are realizing more and more that, you know, they have to raise sons that can be self-sufficient and take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would say something similar to that. Whenever I've heard that expression, it makes me think that parents or mothers are softer on their sons than they would be on their daughters.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is, if you love your child and it's your child, you're going to raise your child
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to do whatever, like the other young lady said, whatever the child needs, you're going to meet that child at their need.
Mm-hmm.
So it has been the belief that you have to do more for the girls than you would the boy. But I don't agree with that. I think, you know, they all need to be reared, they all need to be guided, they all needed to be loved. And we all want to raise them to be self-sufficient because we know we're not going to be here forever. So,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for me, in my upbringing, it wasn't that my mother was softer on my brother. It was that my mother raised me to take care of myself. And I think my interpretation of how my mother raised my brother is for him to be prepared for someone to take care of him, right? And I think so that then wound up playing out in us learning very different kinds of skills. So I think I take Rasheem, the comment around like, you know, raising our daughters and loving our sons, not to mean that you literally don't raise your son, but I think so particularly when women have sons and daughters, that there's a way in which daughters are just taught to be far more self-sufficient, more independent than the sons might wind up being.
does that speak to the makeup of females versus males? You know, the whole idea that they mature faster.
Yeah, I think so, but I also think these are stereotypes, right? So I think about all the ways in which, right, like we think of women as being more nurturing, but these are social conditions, right? So from very, very young ages, we are already teaching little girls that it's okay to cry. We're kissing their boo-boos, right? Like we're putting them in these fluffy pink dresses, teaching them to talk in baby voices, right? So I think there are these ways in which we nurture girls to be, we socially induce a particular version of caring. And then we call it femininity. And I think we assume that it's natural, but I think it's very much socially constructed. And I think that we could do the same thing with boys, right? Like we could also teach boys that it's okay to cry. We could also teach them to cook or to hold babies. And we might have a radically different kind of world, right? In the same way that just as we're taking boys out into the backyard to play football or teach them how to put things together, we could be doing those same things with our daughters, right? So I love Andrea Cooper. She has in a voice from the South, she says something about all girls needing to be more masculine, all boys needing to be more feminine, right? Which in a way is going to collapse our gender constructions because we would be teaching our sons and daughters many of the same things, and then children might be raised to live in a different world than the one we live in.
Yeah, that makes me think of my own family. So I spent a lot of time with my father, so I have like a lot of his ways. And my mom says it all the time, and my sister, she would always refer to me as, you're just like a dude when it came to relationships. Like you think just like a dude. I wish I could think like that. I wish I couldn't get so attached and those type of things. But I think that I don't know. This is so interesting. I think it has to do with like social constructs, but it also just is your upbringing, right? Like my stepmother was she was really big on like boys do this, girls do that, and that was hard for me because I had been with my dad for most. I had taken on so much from him. So I'm like, but I don't want to do that. I want to like climb up the tree. I don't want a red blanket. I want the blue one. Like, what the heck? So, yeah, and I think I think also what it is that for a mom, if you were raised to be like really feminine and womanly and all that stuff, that's what you know a woman to be. And so that's what you teach your daughter, right? Whereas you don't have a firsthand knowledge of how you're supposed to be a man because you're not a man. So you kind of just like almost make like let your son kind of figure it out for real, because like I don't really know, I can't really tell you that part because I'm not that. So just kind of, I'll just give you some freedom to figure it out yourself a little bit and try to love you as much as I can along the way, right? And it's, yeah.
So I have one final question. I'm going to let you ladies go. We're actually a little over that time. For everyone who's still watching, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the engagement in the chat section. This is the counter narrative. This episode is Motherhood at the Intersection, Mothering Sons. Please, if you have not subscribed, please feel free to subscribe right now. It don't hurt. You just push the little red button and then boom, you're subscribed. If you like this video, then like it physically. Like if you like it in your heart and soul, then push something and then just like show me that you like it, because it like boosts my self-esteem about myself and makes me feel like I should make more of these. And also share it with someone else who you might think will like it. I want to go back to you, Rhonda, and ask you, how do you define family?
Oh, wow, that's a tough question. I think we all have the right to self-define it however we want to define it. I don't think we should put it in boxes. And I think that we should just, allow people to define that, for themselves and for their own family. And can I just say, I want to say quickly, we didn't say anything about education. And I think as Black boys go, their exposure to quality education is probably the most significant thing that can make sure a lot of the issues and dynamics that we talked about tonight go in their favor. And so I just wanted to put a plug in for that, because in my household, in my family, education was probably the most important thing that we made sure our sons got a good education.
Can you say a little bit more about that? When you say education, I'm getting a sense that you're meaning something specifically, like more than just like sending them to school.
Yeah, I mean, we were very particular about even the daycare they went to, and all of the schools that they went to all the way through college, because we wanted to make sure, and we spent a lot of money on their education too. And I know that everybody can't afford to do that, but I still think that even with public free education, there are some good schools and there are some schools that are not as good. And I think that the choices that we make sure that our kids are in good environments first for them, but then where they're getting a quality education that will create a foundation for additional educational opportunities later is just so important. And because I think that when people don't do well, academically, that there is a trajectory for, not being able to take care of themselves, if you will. And I think that ends up creating a lot of problems related to some of the stuff that we talked about earlier.
Okay. And Fifi, can you tell us, how do you define family?
The first thing that comes to my mind is the TV show, The Modern Family.
Oh boy, not good.
That's my favorite show of all time. I'm a latecomer to it, but I love it. It's just, a group of people navigating the world. And in my household, it's just me and my son. So, we have similar lifestyles in terms of how we run the household. We have a lot of respect for each other. We are very accommodating for each other. So I would say it's two or more people that get along. They have the same ideas about life. I'm going to go with Rhonda and say everybody gets to define it for themselves. So Yeah.
So
I don't want to go too long.
I know
But,
no, you're fine. I know I said
okay.
that was gonna be the last question, and I'm coming to you, I'm coming to all of you with this one before I have everyone to define family. So this is really for whoever wants to answer it, because family looks like different things in different environments. As mothers, how have the mothers who don't have the traditional setup of what people say, the whatever the traditional setup of what family is. How have you found dating as a mom?
Interesting.
What's that?
I'll let other ladies go with that one.
All right. Anybody want to take a stab at it? Y'all getting shy now.
Can you say more about what you mean?
So basically, just I guess how to work it into. I imagine like how to work it into your life, because I think we have this image of mothers that, or women really, that you're either virgins or you're whores, right? And it's like you're either Saint Mother Teresa or you. It's like
Or Queen Jezebel, right?
right. It's like there's no
Right.
in between. And then it's like if you're a mom, you can't be sexy.
Right.
Like all of these things that we have around it. It's like how do you really like handle that multiple identities, really, because like you are a mother, this loving person who's taking care of a person,
Mhm.
caring for a person, but you're also a grown woman with needs and wants and desires, and I need time with my child, but I also need time to like take care of what I need to do.
Well, I'll jump in. I'll say something really quick. It it was about 10 years. In other words, my son didn't see me with any men from age 10 to age 16. And I made it, I did that on purpose. I wanted to make certain that the man that entered our lives was going to be the right man, quote unquote, right man. So any men that I dated between that time period, I just did not bring home to introduce him to my son. Now, when he turned 16, I met a dude, we dated, and moved in with us. So that was an interesting dynamic. But what I will say I learned from that was my son was very open to me having a love life, because I had shared with him prior to the relationship, mommy is getting ready to engage in a relationship. It's about to go down, big boy. So first thing he said to me was, why can't it just be me and you, Mom? I was like, so I'm like, no, mommy needs some adult stimulation. Mommy needs love. And I wasn't afraid to talk about sex to him because I had enrolled him in a sex education course when he was 14. So he knew the deal. And so when I brought the guy in, it was a little bit strange at first because the guy didn't know whether he was supposed to be my son's father or what. And I kept saying, he's got a father. I don't need you to be his father.
Okay.
I would love it if you were his role model, though. So, yeah,
See.
so all that kind of stuff had to work through.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, Shaida, tell me, what does family mean to you?
Yeah, it's definitely not just biological for sure. So, right, of course, we have like our blood ties. To me, like family is about love and care, acceptance. I think that some folks who are blood might not always make it into the family realm because sometimes the people who are closest to us can do the most harm. My father is West African and I was not raised by him, but I hold on to many of the traditions. So, you know, we do lots of aunties who aren't blood aunties, but they, you know, your village, right? I'm very much a, you know, having a village who loves and supports you. And I think everyone in that village is to count as family.
All right. Michelle.
Okay.
Sorry, Ashley.
Yeah, I think family is defined by support. Definitely goes across blood boundaries and all that. But I think it's about support and those that will push you um, and challenge you and just be present with you, and that you can do the same with them. Um, yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts before we sign off?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think this was great.
Yeah, it's been great.
Y'all are like so dope. Like I mean it. I get so much from you guys, from interacting with some of you, learning from some of you. Ashley, when I met you and you came to that meeting with leaders of a beautiful struggle, with I guess it was your nephew on your hip and the baby in the stroller. Like I was just like, yeah, I want to talk to that chick right there. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh.
He came to the meeting like, yeah, so in activism, you know what I mean? And you know,
Put the baby on the hip.
yeah. And I'm like,
That's what I'm talking about.
right?
Yes. Take my babies with me.
Right. No, and I love that. And I really appreciate watching Shaida mother Chase and all of the things that I see that you like teaching him just through like little interactions here and there, and how intentional you are. You know, Fifi, you know, we got 10 years.
Yeah, girl. I'm so happy that you had an opportunity to see Malik through a few of his stages of life. I mean, you had some impact on him big time.
He's an amazing little boy. I remember teaching him when at SEC, when he was through the youth ministry thing at the Spiritual Empowerment Center.
You helped me to know my son. I'm serious.
It was interesting because he would be quiet and then he'll all of a sudden say something so deep.
And go back to being quiet.
It's like, wow, like this is really,
it's still like that.
And Rhonda, the ways in which you have interacted with me as like I feel like a peer mentor, as like a big sister, and I know we're gonna do like so many great things together. So just want to take the time to say to all of you that I really appreciate you guys taking the time to share your insights and everything.
Well, thank you
for
having us.
Thank you, Rasheem.
It was great to hear the other sisters talk about their experiences.
Awesome.
Yeah. You too, Rhonda. Mm-hmm.
All right, y'all. Thank y'all again and have a good night.
Okay,
Good
you
night.
too, darling. Bye.